We're a very faithful family, and that's what tells me that, her spirit is what's teaching her. She's our little girl.
We love our baby. We just grateful to have her in our life because she's been teaching us a lot. She's been teaching us about patience, about hope, about kindness, strength. He's been teaching us more than we've been teaching her.
In the quiet exam rooms of a hospital in Omaha, Nebraska, a young couple sat in a silence so heavy it felt like it might crush them. The year was 2005. Shawn and Lorena Simpson had brought their 2-month-old daughter, Alex, in for what they thought was a routine check for a fussy infant. Instead, they were staring at a screen that looked like a map of a forgotten world. The neurologist didn't mince words. He told them their daughter's skull was effectively an empty vault, where the intricate, wrinkled folds of the human brain should have been. There was only a dark, vast sea of cerebrospinal fluid. The biological crime scene was the cranial cavity itself. In a typical human, the cerebral hemispheres are the command center. They are what allow us to speak, to dream, to remember, and to move with purpose. In Alex, that command center was gone. It had been replaced by a quiet, watery void. The diagnosis was hydranencephaly. It is a condition so rare and so devastating that most babies don't even make it to their first breath. For those who do, the prognosis is a countdown. The doctors told the Simpsons to prepare for the end. They said Alex wouldn't live past 6 months, maybe a year. At the absolute most, they said she might reach her 4th birthday. They told the parents to go home, keep her comfortable, and wait for the inevitable. The medical staff spoke of her as if she were a biological impossibility, a life that was technically over before it had even truly begun. But nature has a way of breaking its own rules. Today, Alex Simpson is not a memory. She is a 20-year-old woman. She has outlived her expiration date by 16 years and counting. She is a biological outlier that has forced the medical community to rethink the very definition of consciousness. How does a human being without a cerebrum, the part of the brain responsible for thought, personality, and processing the world, manage to not only survive but to thrive in the heart of her family? This isn't just a medical anomaly. This is a story of a silent thief in the womb and a family that refused to accept a death sentence. We are diving into the mystery of the girl who was born without a brain, yet managed to teach everyone what it means to be alive. We are investigating how a tiny piece of tissue the size of a pinky finger could anchor a soul to this world for 2 decades. Where are you watching from tonight? Let us know in the comments below. We love seeing our community grow across the states. Before we dive into this deep investigation of the empty vault, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a narrative from Crime Cortex. In the late autumn of 2005, the city of Omaha was settling into the first real bites of a Nebraska winter. Inside the delivery room, Shawn and Lorena Simpson were experiencing the kind of exhausted joy that only new parents truly understand. When Alex was born, she didn't just look healthy, she looked perfect. She had a typical head circumference. She had the 10 fingers and 10 toes that every parent counts in those first frantic minutes of life. Her eyes were bright, and her grip was strong. The medical team at the hospital performed their standard checks. They looked for the basic markers of life. Does she breathe on her own? Yes. Does she have a heartbeat? Yes. Does she show the Moro reflex, that classic startle response infants give when they feel like they are falling? She did. Based on every outward physical indicator, Alex Simpson was a thriving, typical neonate. The doctors gave the all clear, and the Simpsons took their daughter home to start their new life. For the first 8 weeks, the Simpson household was a place of celebration. There was no reason to suspect that anything was wrong. This is the first great mystery of this case, the neurological disguise. You see, the human brain is built in layers, like a piece of high-tech software. The deepest layer, the brainstem, is what we often call the lizard brain. It is the part of us that stays on autopilot. It handles the breathing, the swallowing, and the basic reflexes. In those first 2 months of life, a baby's daily existence is almost entirely managed by that brainstem. Because Alex's brainstem was intact, she was a biological ghost. She moved, she fed, and she slept exactly like any other infant. Her parents had no way of knowing that beneath the surface, the most critical parts of her humanity were missing. They were living in a period of deceptive normalcy, unaware that a catastrophic event had already occurred in the quiet darkness of the womb months earlier. The transition from a dream to a nightmare happened at the 2-month mark. It wasn't a gradual shift. It was as if a switch had been flipped. Suddenly, the quiet, contented baby was gone. In her place was an infant who seemed to be in a state of constant, inconsolable agony. Alex began to cry for 20 to 22 hours a day. This wasn't the typical fussiness of a colicky baby. This was a sound that came from deep within her core, a relentless, high-pitched scream that no amount of rocking or singing could soothe. Shawn and Lorena were living in a state of permanent sleep deprivation, their lives measured in the few minutes of silence Alex would grant them before the screaming started again. Along with the crying came a failure of the body's most basic systems. Alex began to struggle with her feedings. She couldn't digest milk properly. She was losing weight. Her growth stalled. In medical terms, she was experiencing a failure to thrive. A phrase that sends a cold shiver down any parent's spine. What is the weather like today in your corner of the world? Are you seeing clear skies? Or is it a day for staying inside and watching true crime? The Simpsons returned to the doctors, seeking answers for the crying and the digestive failure. They were met with the standard reassurances at first. Some babies are just more difficult than others. Maybe it was an allergy. Maybe it was severe acid reflux. Still, the intuition of a parent is a powerful investigative tool. Shawn and Lorena knew this was something more. This wasn't a behavioral issue. It was a systemic collapse. When the search for answers continued at an emergency room in Omaha, the doctors decided it was time for neuroimaging. They scheduled an MRI to see if there was an obstruction or perhaps an infection causing the irritability. Up until this point, everyone, the parents, the nurses, the pediatricians, assumed they were dealing with a whole child who simply had a medical complication. The moment the scan appeared on the monitor, that assumption was shattered forever. The neurologist looked at the images and then at the couple. The words he spoke were so surreal that they almost didn't register. He told them that their daughter's brain was not there. Not just damaged, not just underdeveloped, it was missing. The cerebral hemispheres, the 2 massive lobes that fill the majority of the human skull, were entirely gone. In their place were 2 thin, membranous sacs filled with fluid. The diagnosis was a formal name for a hollowed-out life, Hydranencephaly. The doctor explained that Alex only had a small portion of her cerebellum in the back of her head, a piece of tissue Shawn would later describe as being half the size of a pinky finger. This was the tiny anchor holding her to the world. If this revelation is shaking you as much as it did the medical team back in 2005, hit that like button. The prognosis was even more devastating than the diagnosis. The medical staff told The Simpsons that children born with this level of neurological absence do not survive. They predicted Alex would be gone before she reached 6 months. When she survived that, they moved the goalpost to 1 year. Eventually, they told the family not to expect her to live past her 4th birthday. The Simpsons were told that their daughter would never see. She would never hear. She would never recognize their voices or feel the warmth of their touch in any meaningful way. According to the textbooks, she was a vegetable in a cradle. She was a terminal patient with a ticking clock in her chest. But as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into years, the Simpsons noticed something the doctors couldn't explain. Alex wasn't just surviving. She was reacting. She was fighting. The deceptive normalcy of her first 2 months was gone, replaced by a new, more mysterious reality. The clock was ticking, but Alex Simpson was the one controlling the time. In a typical pregnancy, the brain follows a strict, miraculous blueprint. By the 7th week of gestation, the foundational structures are already in place. The forebrain is preparing to specialize into the 2 massive cerebral hemispheres that define our species. These are the parts of the brain that handle everything from your first memory of a summer day in Nebraska to the way you solve a complex math problem. They are the seat of the soul, the engine of personality. But in Alex's case, something went terribly wrong during that critical second trimester. It wasn't that her brain failed to form. This is a common misconception. In cases of anencephaly, the brain never truly begins its journey. But hydranencephaly, the condition Alex has, is what doctors call a destructive process. Dr. Sumit Parikh, a leading pediatric neurologist at the Cleveland Clinic, explains that this is a case where the brain was already under construction, only for the project to be catastrophically sabotaged. The most likely motive for this biological crime? A massive stroke in the womb. Imagine the developing brain as a city that relies on 2 major highways for all its power and resources. These highways are the bilateral internal carotid arteries. They are the twin pipes that pump life-sustaining oxygen and nutrients to the growing cerebrum. In Alex, for reasons that science still struggles to fully grasp, those highways were blocked. This is known as a bilateral internal carotid artery occlusion. When that blood flow was cut off, the oxygen supply vanished. The developing cerebral tissue, the very thing that makes us human, began to wither. It didn't just die, it was resorbed by the body. It was a silent, internal erasure. As the tissue disappeared, the space it left behind was filled with cerebrospinal fluid, contained within thin, delicate membranes. The vault of her skull remained intact, but the treasure inside was gone. Even as the stroke destroyed the higher centers of her brain, a small, stubborn region remained untouched. The posterior circulation, the blood vessels at the back of the head, continued to pump. This allowed the brainstem, the meninges, and the basal ganglia to survive the disaster. The brainstem is the most ancient part of our biology. It is the part of us that doesn't need thought to function. It controls the heart rate, the breathing, and the basic reflexes. Because this anchor remained, Alex was able to survive the pregnancy. She was able to survive the birth. Shawn Simpson has described the physical reality of this in a way that stays with you. He says that when you look at the scans, Alex only has a piece of her cerebellum, the little brain, responsible for motor control and balance that is about half the size of his pinky finger. Think about that for a second. Everything that Alex is, every reaction, every breath she has taken for 7,300 days is supported by a piece of tissue no larger than the tip of a man's finger. If you're finding this deep dive into the mysteries of human biology as intense as we are, give this video a like. It really helps the algorithm share Alex's story with more people who need to see the power of resilience. The statistical odds of this happening, and then resulting in a live birth, are staggering. Scientists estimate that hydranencephaly occurs in roughly 1 in 10,000 pregnancies, but most of those pregnancies never reach full term. The loss is too great. The biological toll is too high. For every 50,000 babies born in the United States, only 1 will arrive with this condition. It is a 1 in 50,000 anomaly. When the doctors in Omaha looked at those first scans, They weren't being heartless. They were being realistic, based on every piece of data they had. In the medical world, a child without a cerebrum is often viewed through the lens of a terminal diagnosis. The hemispheres are what process sight. They are what process sound. Without them, the medical consensus was that Alex was legally blind and profoundly deaf. They believed she would live her life in a permanent, vegetative state, incapable of knowing who her mother was or feeling the love of her father. But this is where the investigation takes an even more mysterious turn. While the theft in the womb was absolute, the aftermath has been anything but. If the cerebrum is the only place where awareness exists, then Alex should be a blank slate. Yet, for 20 years, she has been writing a different story. Medical science tells us that the brainstem is just a relay station. It tells us that the cerebellum is just for movement. Even so, the Simpson family insists that Alex is attuned to them. They believe that the small amount of brain tissue she has left has done something impossible. They believe it has rewired itself. They believe the tiny pinky-sized cerebellum has stepped up to handle the jobs it was never meant to do. In the world of forensic neurology, we call this plasticity. It is the brain's ability to find a detour when the main road is washed away. In a typical person, this might mean learning to speak again after a stroke. In Alex, it means creating a conscious life from almost nothing. It means defying the most fundamental laws of neurobiology. What is the weather like today in your city? Is it a cold winter day like it often is in Omaha? Or are you watching this from somewhere warm? Let us know below. As we dig deeper into this investigation, we have to ask, was it just biological luck that kept that brainstem alive? Or is there something else at play? Doctor, Parikh and other experts have noted that while we are still learning, this destructive process can be triggered by many things: fetal infections, environmental toxins, or even rare genetic disorders that impact how blood vessels form. In Alex's case, it appears to have been a freak vascular accident, a stroke of bad luck in the most literal and devastating sense. But the real mystery isn't why it happened. The mystery is why she is still here. Why did the thief leave just enough behind for Alex to build a life? Why did that tiny piece of cerebellum refuse to let go? As we move into the next part of our investigation, we're going to look at the 24-hour-a-day fortress the Simpsons built to protect what was left of their daughter. Because survival on this scale isn't just about biology. It's about a relentless, mechanical, and emotional war against the odds. To survive for 2 decades, with a diagnosis that usually claims lives within months, you need more than just hope. You need a fortress. For the Simpson family in Omaha, Nebraska, that fortress isn't made of stone and mortar, but of plastic tubes, sterilized sensors, and a level of vigilance that would break most people. Alex Simpson's 20-year journey is a mechanical and pharmacological feat that occurs every single second behind the closed doors of her family home. When you look at Alex, you are seeing a body that has been bypassed by technology to keep a soul anchored in place. Because she lacks the cerebral hemispheres that manage voluntary movement, her body cannot perform the most basic tasks we take for granted. She cannot coordinate the muscles of her jaw or her tongue. This means she cannot chew, and she cannot safely swallow. 1. In a typical world, this would lead to starvation or aspiration. But in the Omaha fortress, the solution is a gastrostomy tube, or a G-tube, inserted directly into her stomach. Every calorie, every ounce of hydration is measured and delivered through this plastic lifeline. Even the act of breathing is a high-stakes operation. Alex relies on a tracheostomy tube, a surgical opening in her throat to ensure her airway remains clear. 1. without the cortical control to manage her own secretions or prevent her airway from collapsing under its own weight. This small piece of equipment is the only thing standing between her and a fatal respiratory event. This level of care requires round-the-clock monitoring. In the early years, the fear was so intense that Lorena Simpson would sleep beside her daughter every single night, her hand resting on Alex's chest just to make sure she was still breathing. For 3 years, sleep was a luxury the family couldn't afford. They lived in a state of permanent red alert, waiting for the mechanical failure or the sudden spike in heart rate that would signal a crisis. This isn't just parenting. It is an ongoing forensic oversight of a biological system that is perpetually on the brink of failure. We want to hear your thoughts. Do you think medical science or familial devotion plays a bigger role in Alex's survival? Tell us in the comments. We are reading every single one of them. Then there is the internal battle, the struggle with muscle rigidity. Without the cerebrum to send relaxed signals to the body, the muscles of a person with hydranencephaly can become incredibly stiff, a condition known as hypertonicity. 2. This isn't just uncomfortable. It can be excruciating. To combat this, Alex requires Valium to help her muscles release their grip and allow her to fall asleep at night. 1. It is a delicate pharmacological dance, balancing the need for sedation with the need to keep her heart and lungs functioning on their own. Beyond the physical toll is the systemic one. Navigating the healthcare landscape in Nebraska for a child who wasn't supposed to be here is its own kind of investigation. The Simpsons have spent 20 years dealing with insurance companies, state disability services, and a medical bureaucracy that often struggles to categorize a patient like Alex. When a diagnosis is labeled terminal, the system is designed to provide palliative care, not 2 decades of life-sustaining infrastructure. The family's survival is also a victory over a bureaucracy that often prefers predictable outcomes over outliers. Shawn and Lorena Simpson credit their ability to maintain this fortress to 2 things: faith and love. To the outside world, it looks like an exhausting, impossible routine. But to the Simpsons, every tube change and every midnight alarm is an act of defiance. They have built a sanctuary in Omaha where the stolen brain of a child is replaced by the absolute commitment of a family. When people ask SJ about his family, he doesn't start with his hobbies or his school. He starts with Alex. He tells them with a fierce sense of pride about his disabled sister. To a 14-year-old in Nebraska, Alex isn't a medical anomaly or a case study in a textbook. She is a living, breathing mystery that he decodes every single day. SJ has become the primary witness to what he describes as emotional radiation. This is where the story of Alex Simpson moves from a medical tragedy to a high-stakes investigation into the nature of the human soul. SJ claims that his sister possesses a level of intuition that borders on the impossible. In his view, Alex isn't just existing. She is highly attuned to the emotional temperature of the room. SJ tells a story that has left local reporters and medical experts in a state of disbelief. He describes moments when the house is completely silent, yet Alex begins to show signs of distress. One specific instance involved his grandmother, who was suffering from significant back pain. She hadn't said a word. She wasn't groaning or crying out. Yet, SJ watched as Alex began to react, her own body tensing, her face showing a mirror of that discomfort. SJ calls it radiating off of it. He believes his sister picks up on the physical and emotional pain of the people she loves, even when there are no outward signs to process. What time is it where you are right now? It is always fascinating to see when the crime Cortex community is most active. Drop those hours and minutes in the comments. This isn't just a brother's imagination. Shawn Simpson, the father, who has been her primary caregiver for 2 decades, has documented similar phenomena. The clinical diagnosis says that Alex is blind. Without a visual cortex in the cerebral hemispheres, the brain has no way to turn light into images. Still, Shawn has seen Alex looking for him. He describes the way her eyes move, not in the random, oscillating patterns often seen in neurological patients, but with a sense of tracking. When he speaks, she moves her eyes toward the sound. When he moves across the room, she seems to follow the shadow of his presence. This brings us to the heart of the neuroforensic debate. If the cerebrum, the thinking part of the brain, is gone, how can this be happening? The answer might lie in the structures the thief in the womb left behind. While the higher brain centers were destroyed, Alex's basal ganglia, meninges, and brainstem remained intact. The basal ganglia are fascinating structures. They are involved in motor control and learning, but more importantly, they are key players in the processing of emotion. Along with her tiny, pinky-sized cerebellum, these ancient parts of her anatomy may have undergone a radical process of plasticity. In the world of the crime cortex, we often investigate the biological mandates of human behavior. Usually, those mandates tell us that without a cerebrum, there is no consciousness. But Alex Simpson's 20-year survival suggests that the brainstem and the basal ganglia are not just relay stations. They are capable of a different kind of knowing. If the cerebral highway is destroyed, the brain doesn't just give up, it finds the back roads. It utilizes every millimeter of remaining tissue to maintain a connection to the world. For SJ, this isn't a debate about neurons, it's a fact of life. He has seen her know when good things are happening and know when the atmosphere is dark. This level of awareness, processed through a piece of tissue no larger than a pinky finger, challenges everything we think we know about personhood. It suggests that consciousness might be more resilient than the hardware that carries it. SJ's pride in his sister is the emotional anchor of this investigation. He doesn't see a victim, he sees a fighter. He sees a sister who can navigate the world of emotions better than most people, with full brains. This sensory mystery is the ultimate pattern interrupt in her medical history. It forces us to ask, if a girl without a cerebrum can sense her grandmother's pain, what other secrets is the human body hiding? As we move toward the final chapter of this investigation, we look at what 20 years of this defiance looks like. We look at the milestone that was never supposed to happen, the 20th birthday, and the legacy Alex is leaving behind in the city of Omaha. In the early winter of 2025, the Simpson family gathered around a cake that represented 20 years of defiance. When Alex was born in November 2005, the medical experts at the hospital spoke in terms of months. They whispered the word terminal in the hallways. They told Shawn and Lorena Simpson that their daughter would likely never reach her 4th birthday. For most parents, that kind of prognosis acts as a horizon, a point where hope ends. But for the Simpsons, it was merely a starting line. The room is filled with the scent of vanilla and the warmth of a family that has spent 7,305 days in a state of high-stakes care. Every year Alex has lived has been a documented miracle in the Omaha community. From her 10th birthday, which was celebrated as a decade of impossibility, to this moment, she has shattered every clinical expectation. What's the weather like today in your city? It is often biting and cold in Nebraska this time of year, but inside the Simpson house, it is a different world. Let us know your local forecast in the comments. As the candles burn low, we have to look at the legacy this young woman is creating. Alex Simpson is one of the longest living survivors of Hydranencephaly in recorded history. To find a comparison, we have to look across the globe to a woman in Italy who lived to the age of 32. That individual even learned to walk with a spastic gait after years of relentless physical therapy. While Alex's path has been different, her survival into her 3rd decade places her in a select group of outliers who are forcing the medical world to rewrite the books. The investigation conducted by our team at Crime Cortex has found that the story of Alex Simpson is not just about a missing cerebrum. It is about the power of the social environment. Shawn and Lorena don't use medical jargon when you ask how they did it. They don't talk about supraclinoid segments or internal carotid artery occlusion. They speak of a much simpler, much more powerful force. When asked how Alex reached this milestone, they both answer with a single word: love. SJ is perhaps the greatest witness to this legacy. He has grown up in the shadow of a medical mystery, but he has never seen his sister as a collection of symptoms. He has spent his life researching her condition, trying to understand the why so he can better manage the how. For SJ, the crime that happened in the womb 20 years ago did not rob Alex of her life. It gave her a different kind of existence, one that is defined by an extraordinary emotional connection. He still tells anyone who asks that Alex is the first thing he mentions when describing his family. She is his disabled sister, but in his eyes, she is the strongest person in Omaha. We must also consider the forensic legacy for the doctors who first treated her. 20 years ago, they were operating on the best data available. They were scared for the family, and they were trying to prepare them for the worst. But the Simpson case shows the limits of medical prediction. It shows that when you combine a preserved brainstem with an unrelenting infrastructure of love, the biological mandate of death can be pushed back for decades. Alex cannot see the candles. She cannot hear the happy birthday song in the way we do. Yet, the way she tracks her father's voice and senses the stress or joy of her brother suggests that she is celebrating in a way that science still cannot fully measure. She is a pioneer of the subcortical mind. 20 years ago, we were scared. Shawn admitted to local reporters recently, but faith, I think, is really what kept us alive. That faith has transformed a medical tragedy into a human interest story that has captivated people far beyond the borders of Nebraska. Alex is a fighter who has survived 16 years beyond her expiration date. She has taught a city, and now a digital audience, that life has value even when the hardware is incomplete. As we close this investigation into the empty vault of the Simpson case, we are left with a startling realization. The human spirit doesn't require a full brain to leave a mark on the world. It only requires a heart that refuses to stop beating and a family that refuses to stop believing. Alex Simpson continues to live, a 20-year-old mystery in the heart of America, showing us all the true meaning of resilience. We've been following this story for 3 weeks, and now we want to hear from you. What do you think is the most remarkable part of Alex's survival? Let's get a discussion going in the comments. Thanks for sticking with us through this deep dive on Crime Cortex. If you found Alex's story as moving as we did, share this video with someone who needs a reminder that miracles are real. Hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and we will see you in the next investigation.